Ladies and gentlemen, there are at least two major fallacies that need to be understood if we're to overcome the arguments of containment, coexistence, accommodation, and ultimate merger with world communism. First of all, the premise behind these arguments is wrong. And you know you can't do much with a piece of logic if you start out with a faulty premise. The premise underlying the grand design is this. If all-out war should develop between major powers today, well, stop right there, because we've already passed it. Back up all the way to the very first word, if. If. Ladies and gentlemen, when are we going to get it through our heads that all-out war is being waged against us right now, and has been for a long time? And by all-out war, I mean total war, not just military war. We're so used to thinking in terms of the old-fashioned concepts of warfare, in which the primary weapons were guns and bombs, we fail to realize that for the first time in history, we're facing an enemy that has mastered the concept of total warfare. World War III that rages around us right now is a political war, an economic war, a psychological war, a spiritual war, and a military war. But the military aspect is the least important of all. The only way that military strategy plays a role in the communist blueprint is in the form of guerrilla tactics, aimed at creating internal chaos and anarchy, to create the kind of conditions conducive for the quick seizure of power centers by a small group of organized and well-trained revolutionaries. That's the only kind of military strategy you'll find in the communist manuals, whether written by Lenin, Mao Zedong, or Che Guevara. And even this kind of limited military activity could never succeed without the simultaneous waging of non-military war. The communist guerrilla bands wouldn't stand a chance of succeeding in most countries without other communists operating secretly among the people to create the appearance of popular support, operating within the communications media to generate propaganda, and operating inside the government itself to create the necessary corruption, bickering, and apparent inefficiency to prevent that government from moving strongly against the guerrilla groups. In Cuba, for instance, almost everyone remembers that when Batista fled the country, an army of over 45,000 soldiers surrendered without a fight to only about 1,800 revolutionaries under Castro. But very few people were aware that the general who surrendered these forces was himself a member of the Communist Party in Cuba, a perfect example of the non-military strategy of infiltration and treason producing an apparent military victory. The favorite weapons of communist conquest are not engines of mass destruction in the hands of soldiers wearing a recognizable uniform. They are instead propaganda, the slanted view of history, the preaching of hatred to incite civil disorder, the tactics of internal subversion, treason, blackmail, the smear, political assassination, all committed by soldiers who wear no uniform and who claim to be loyal citizens of the target country marked for conquest from within. This is how communism has spread across the globe, not with invading armies or bombs, and it's extremely unlikely that they'd abandon this non-military strategy, which has been so effective for them right at the zenith of their success. Now, without a doubt, the bomb is the most powerful weapon in the communist arsenal, but it's as a psychological weapon, not as a military one. The Soviets have gained more by using the bomb as a psychological weapon than they ever could have using it as a military weapon. Under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation, we've accepted concessions, compromises, and defeats one after another, which would have been unthinkable without that specter of a giant mushroom cloud fixed deep in our subconscious. As a matter of fact, the bomb as a psychological weapon is being dropped on the American people every single day. Movies such as On the Beach, 7 Days in May, Dr. Strangelove, Failsafe, Planet of the Apes. These well-produced and entertaining movies have done really a professional job of strengthening, subconsciously at least, the premise of the grand design. Motion pictures, of course, aren't the only source of this conditioning of the public mind. Radio, TV, books, magazines, and newspapers have all played more than their part. The message that has more or less been drummed into our heads follows the pattern pretty well presented in this illustrated brochure entitled Let There Be a World, written by Felix Green. Green is well known in ultra-leftist circles as an importer of propaganda film from Red China, and for his lectures and motion pictures extolling the virtues of life under communism in Asia. And by the way, I picked this up not too long ago at the Communist Bookstore in Los Angeles, the Progressive Bookshop it's called. Every once in a while I browse around in there just to find out what the progressives and the intellectuals are reading nowadays. And this is a classic example. Page after page of beautifully reproduced photographs, all depicting in minute detail the horrors of nuclear war and the beauties of disarmament and peace. Let's take a look at a few of these. And naturally, just for openers, we see here in the beginning the fireball and the mushroom cloud. Then the charred bodies at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Grim reminders of the pain and the suffering of any war, but particularly of nuclear war. And then, for those of us with weak imaginations, we're shown what could happen to our cities. According to this map, if one of the super bombs were dropped on Manhattan Island, we could cross off everything clear out to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and fallout would take care of the rest, probably clear to California. And speaking of fallout, they have a special section here just for the ladies. Preserved in jars of formaldehyde, these are the grotesque remains after autopsy of tiny infants, stillborn and deformed, supposedly as a result of radioactive fallout. Now, what woman can look at these, or what man for that matter, without some kind of a lasting emotional reaction against even the mere thought of risking nuclear war? Well, here, rather graphically presented, is what at least is supposedly the only way that we can prevent this from happening to us. Disarmament, of course. And finally, back here at the very end, the appeal to the heartstrings. Let there be a world. It's really quite well done, I think. You have to give these people credit for knowing how to merchandise an idea. By the way, these are generally the same people who like to label anti-communists as being fright peddlers. Well, with regard to this particular book, I'm not saying that these pictures are phony or that the devastating effects of nuclear war have been exaggerated to the public for propaganda purposes, although there's now a great deal of evidence to support both of these contentions. But that's not the point. The point is that the motion picture producers, the TV commentators, and the publishers who are so creative in their ability to convey to us all the horrors of death under a nuclear bomb, for some reason never get around to portraying the fact that there are other horrible ways to die. We're shown the mushroom cloud, but not the mass graves or the torture devices that exist behind the iron and bamboo curtains. We're shown the charred bodies at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but not the emaciated bodies of the living dead in Soviet concentration camps, or the mutilated corpses of innocent civilians hacked to pieces by communist terrorists in one country after another. It's not that there aren't pictures like this. It's just that we're seldom allowed to see them or be reminded of them through the accepted channels of mass communication. Now, here are just two examples out of many that could be offered. Two documents that have been readily available for a long time. They contain material which almost has been totally denied to the American people. The first is a government pamphlet entitled Lest We Forget, a pictorial summary of communism in action. It consists primarily of photographs smuggled out of Eastern Europe, providing documentary proof of communist atrocities committed in those lands in order to liquidate anti-communist opposition and to terrorize the people into submission. Now, there's no professional touch here, but the pictures still tell the story. We have the mass graves